Welcome, everybody, to the Wise Wealth podcast. We've got an awesome guest on the show today. I'm going to let her introduce herself. We're going to be talking about a lot around the mindset, about wealth, about failing. And I think these are all interesting aspects, whether you've already made your money in the world or whether or not you're aspiring to make your money in the world. So I'll hand over to Jessica. Please give us an introduction about yourself and let everybody know who you are.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, I'm Jessica McGawley. I am a psychological consultant, mediator, and the founder of Dallington. Dallington is a practice specifically for young adults from multi-generational family businesses, and we support them as they are growing up, typically aged 16 to 30, with everything personal and professional.
Awesome. So we was having a brief chat before we pressed record, and we was talking about failure and I suppose how that sort of affects generational wealth. And I think what we was talking about was probably really valuable, and that's why I wanted to press the record button. So let's try to go back to it. Give us your thought process of the failure side of things within wealth generation, and sort of what your experience is with that.
So I think, promoting failure as a parent is key across the board. It doesn't matter if it's wealth or not. Helping your children develop a healthy relationship with failing, getting back up is the key to developing authentic self-esteem. However, it's particularly difficult and misunderstood within successful families because typically the first generation wealth creators will have failed so many times. I mean, I'm sure you know this, or your listeners will know this, as in all the successes that they have got to will have been because they failed, learned, and climbed that mountain. The problem is, unwittingly, and we all do it, myself included, you want to provide the best for your children, and sometimes you feel that the best is giving them an easy life and comfort and nice holidays, things like that. It also helps you sometimes offset the guilt of being so busy and being at work, and that's also important to note. The problem with it is what we then get is teenagers, young adults in their 20s who have such a bad relationship with failure that when something relatively small goes wrong, like not getting your first choice of university or failing your driving test, and it feels like the end of the world.
So what? Yeah. So basically, we're sort of like robbing our kids really of that skill set. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that none of us want to see, you've got a child, I've got children, none of us want to see our kids in pain. The problem is there's a difference between letting them fail and also letting them suffer. Now, to give me a pinch of salt, because I know that sounds brutal, but when your child falls over in the playground and you just pick them back up and you go, right, let's crack on. And that's good, you want them to do that, but sometimes it does actually matter that they see the blood, that they've hurt their knee, and they're a little bit more careful next time. Doesn't mean that you pander to it. It's the same with this. When one of the young adults we work with makes a big mistake, that could be anything from genuinely failing in an exam because they didn't prep, or blowing the budget, whatnot. I always say to the parent, let them feel the pain. If they have spent their entire uni budget in the first week, you let them feel that pain and let them eat what all the other students are eating. Don't come in and save the day. Otherwise, you rob them of the experience of learning.
Yeah. And I suppose from that aspect, why have we built up this sort of belief or judgment that because times are changing, right? I'm a massive advocate for winning or failing and giving it your best shot. But now you get sort of like contribution badges, and everybody gets a sticker when they join in, and I just cannot relate to that. I don't understand it, and I think that is creating ultimately the problem that you're trying to solve.
I completely agree, and I realize that's a little bit controversial, especially in my in my sort of training and role, which is all about fairness and inclusivity and everybody being a part. But actually, it's not reality, and it's not helping people get set up for life by having a contribution badge. I'm with you.
Yeah. Well, how do we even fall down that sort of route, I suppose, of like of changing that because I always think like some of the I call them old school entrepreneurs, like I'm in my 30s, some of the guys that are in the 50s and 60s, that wasn't even a thing back then to have that. And it was, get out there into the world and realize what real is like. And I feel like that's sort of getting robbed from the younger generations
It,
now.
it hugely is. I think that there's a quote I like to use a lot, which is the top of the mountain isn't anything without the climb. Now, you'll know that, all of your listeners will know that, which is if you could have told them, I could have just handed you that promotion, that paycheck, that bonus uh, without the work. Yes, there's a part of you goes, well, that sounds easy enough, but it's the feeling of satisfaction. That's what you're going for. That's what you're hunting for.
Yeah.
And if you're just given that, gosh, like what's the relationship you have with actually your pride and self-worth and self-efficacy and the belief that you can do it? So we have to, I do think we should go back to some of the old-fashioned, I don't know if you had like a star chart on your wall for, at the end of the week, if you'd helped out, you got something, not just you get it as standard. Now
Yeah.
this could absolutely delve into a total rabbit hole because technology plays a big part here. It's we are completely inept when it comes to waiting, and we can get anything we want immediately. Our children are not growing up like we are, where we had to wait for the next episode of something to show a week later. You get everything on demand. And that has actually played into some of that.
Yeah, massively actually, because that's something, my son has that, why
Mm.
is this not working? Why is it not letting? Because we're going through a patch right now, mate, where there is no Wi-Fi, so it's tough. Do you look
Yes.
out the window and count some sheep, and it's it's
Um,
yeah.
I want to ask you a question. So when I was a child, I spent my weekends doing what my parents wanted to do. So if that was that my dad was playing rugby, we were all sat by the side of the rugby pitch. Or if my mum had to go and do a shop somewhere, we were in the back of the car. The average parent that I work with, including my own friendship group and myself, our weekends revolve around our children. Their
Mm,
parties, their play dates, their nap times, their routine, whatever. There has been a very big shift. And
yeah.
I think that there was a healthy balance in between, but like most things, it's just gone too far.
Yeah, so I think from my background, I was sort of like, I lived in Hertfordshire, so we predominantly lived in around busy places, and then we decided to move to the countryside to live a more outdoor lifestyle. I think we're in the middle of that now of running around after my son
Mm.
over taking him to parties, over doing things here because we've got a large amount of land here, and so me and my other half, Nicola, we predominantly try to look after everything ourselves. So, we've got acres and acres that need cutting, so we go out and cut the fields, and it's
Wonderful.
very, I call it like we have a big greenhouse, we grow our own veg and stuff like that. So he's involved in that side. So it's sort of like a happy medium because he's
Yeah.
growing strawberries, he's growing raspberries, he's growing carrots. He's seeing what happens when you plant a seed and what the outcome is of that. When we're out in the fields, he's out on his quad bike. So he's privileged in the respect that he's on a quad bike. He's only 4. He's on a quad bike and he's racing it around. But I'm on a tractor and I'm chasing him in a tractor. He loves that. I'm getting the same job done. He's having fun. So it's a happy medium of being outdoors. So trying to bridge that gap, I think, is what we're trying to do. I think we're succeeding in it quite nicely because he's learning so much about the outdoor, um, rather than sort of a privileged environment.
Well, I mean, what you've just described is incredibly wholesome, and I'm sure all of us would like a bit of that, but it's
Yeah,
not reality for most.
yeah,
Uh, and again, look, if I meet a young adult or teenager who is in quotes entitled, let's say,
yeah,
uh, my first reaction is, well, they haven't entitled themselves. Most usually, it's not the child that's necessarily entitled themselves. The parent has entitled them.
yeah.
And
I
again,
think around that, I have a saying that, to create generational wealth, someone in that bloodline has
mm,
had to sacrifice pretty much their entire life to
Mhm.
accrue mass amount of wealth without spending it, without
Mhm.
distributing it to then benefit the next generation. Someone's got to give it up. So yeah, I think you're right in what you're saying.
So we must, and again, I think it's really important that I flag. I fail at this too, and you know, I'm human too. But the things that have worked when I've tested this are really sitting with the pain when my son is battering on and on and on at me, and you just want to give in. It is absolutely worth it because they aren't the ones showing up at school gates with, you know, the latest this and that, and they do value the wholesome activities, the one that you're describing, because they are, you know, they're so much better.
Yeah. I think if you're aware of it, there's ways to tackle it, right? There's some schools now that have sort of very good schools where they have outdoor crafts. This is how you make a fire, this is sleeping outside, these are the tools
Yeah.
that you use, things like that, and sort of ingrain it. But yeah, I suppose you can when you're yeah, I think if you could go past that, right? Like you're saying, if you're sort of a workaholic, you have that guilt of wanting to reward your kids with materialistic things, and you soon go down that slant. So I suppose for me, around that conversation, for people that are aspiring to be wealthy, what
Mm.
what is the importance of failure? If we can drum it into them, what
Yeah.
they see it as a bad thing, but what actually is it?
Okay, so first of all, I'd just make this far more organic, which is we all fail all the time. We fail in our personal relationships, with ourselves, with our own boundaries, with our health, with our work, you name it. We're failing all the time. That's okay. We have to normalize that chat. And what I really like is when families of mine sit down at the end of the table, at the end of the day, around the dining table, and the conversation, instead of how was your day? What did you do well at today? Is what did you fail at today? And
Oh,
everybody, mum, dad, whoever's around that table, whoever's a caregiver, a parent, they they explain what they failed at. And that could be, you know what, I said something I shouldn't, I hurt a friend of mine today, or I cheated on a test, but everybody has to talk about it and then say what they learned from it and why they wouldn't do it again.
oh, that's interesting. That is very interesting. Yeah, I've never looked at that. I've never looked at that. And I suppose by doing that, you then normalize failure, and also you then see the benefits of failure and how you've overcome that.
You normalize failure, we also normalize the learning. We're not celebrating failure in the way of, you know, you should glamorize it. We're saying if you can learn from it, then it's never a failure if you have learned from it. Now, the reason why this is important for parents who are striving to be increasingly successful or wealthy is that there will be a disparity at some point between your child seeing you as well, prominent is the word, and
Mm.
they at home, yes, your dad or mum or whoever, and you're that wholesome figure to them. But actually, the more successful you become, other people will talk about them in a certain way, and you'll start to see them as this quite high status person. And how on earth could you ever achieve your own success when you've got a parent like that? So by humanizing yourself and saying, yeah, I've done well, but I've done well because I have learned from, you know, these
Yeah,
failures.
yeah. I think that's I'm trying to remember his name actually. I can't remember his name, but he used to own a jet company. It's going to really annoy me now, so I'm going to have to know his name. But he implemented something really interesting with his child. Joe Rogan. He was on Joe Rogan, and he had uh,
Mm.
David Goggins lived with
Oh,
him.
yes, he's wonderful.
Jesse Itzler. Or Isla maybe. I think it's yeah. And he's got a thing with his son of even though he's busy, even though he's ultra successful, I wouldn't say maybe he's a billionaire. I think he's in the high millions. He he will try to do something that is like an adventure or something like that every 3 months with his son. So they'll go and hike up a crazy mountain. It's winter, it's bleak, and I think his son's like 10 or 11, and put him through that crazy experience of understanding what the struggles look like to achieve that. And so it's like grounding his son to show that this is achievable as a father-son relationship. And I
Yeah.
thought these are things, these are really, because no one really tells you how do you do that when you get to that stage in
Yeah.
your career to, in my opinion, to not have what I would call a soft child that's going to have these issues later in life. If you can harden them up to experience like these and things and have those high-end accomplishments where you're saying that they can't get to the level where they see their parents by doing this. It's like, well, hang about here. What other 11-year-old has gone and climbed that mountain, camped out on the top of the mountain in 2 days of crazy snow and packed their kit up and then come back down and they have their own stories within their own group.
I mean, that's wonderful. I'm always a little bit tentative when I hear these stories. I think it's amazing, but it's not realistic for the average family, and it may not be possible, or it may just not be what the parent is comfortable doing for
Yeah.
themselves. There are other ways, but I mean, absolutely.
They
If
could do Snowden, they could go
yes,
do,
it
you
doesn't
know,
need to be glamorous by any means. Yeah, you can easily do that. But how do I put it? The young adults that I work with, the ones who are from the most affluent, most successful families, the ones who are the most resilient and prepared for life, are the ones whose childhoods better reflected reality. By that I mean, yes, they probably didn't need to do any chores. They still did. They didn't need a budget, so to speak. They got one. It wasn't about, they had a very good understanding of the difference between net worth and self-worth. And I think that's really important that you start having those conversations early. And that, of course, that we'd be stupid to say they're not linked because, as we all know, if your net worth increases, yes, some of your self-worth will increase, but they shouldn't be completely intrinsically linked.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's a fascinating conversation. And we was also talking about like wealth shame.
Mm.
Can you explain a little bit more about that? What's your thoughts behind wealth shame? What does it
Well,
entail?
wealth shame is more commonly cited for in multi-generational family wealth, not so much in first to second generation wealth yet. So in multi-generational family wealth, let's say you're 3+ generations, the chances are what the original business, unless it was financial, but still there would have been investments, whatever the original business was in is probably a business that is now a little controversial. So it could be oil and
Yeah,
industrial plants and things like that are, some of those are what allowed for mass wealth creation. And now those family businesses are evolving and trying to be and investing and moving in different ways. But sometimes the children who are inheriting that wealth and that business do not align with the wealth and where it's come from. They also don't feel that they have done anything. It's a little bit like survivor's guilt, where they think, why me? Why have I woken up in this house where you know, with all of this wealth when I'm looking at, Israel Palestine on the news? How did I get this?
yeah. I find that so strange though that they feel that wealth shame. Surely it should be if you're at that stage, it should be something along the lines. See, I'm so adamant to build generational wealth, and I know that there's that saying. I can't remember what it's. I think it's like by the third generation.
Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations.
Yeah, and it's they either lose the wealth or they completely handle it in a poor manner. And so my sort of thought process is there's you got to be able to put in guidelines, rails, you know,
Well,
targets to be able to change that. There's nothing wrong with, let's say you're a billionaire and you're on third generation, and let's say your family did come from plantations and
yeah,
slavery and that sort of thing. We'll change it.
yeah.
Change it. Have your you can't reverse the past, but you can learn from it. And it's like, what, go out to Africa, go do volunteering, go out to those regions that are struggling, get involved in that on that the groundwork. And I would
I,
say open it.
look, I agree, but I'm right in thinking you're a millennial.
I suppose I am. Yeah, I was born in 91.
Yeah. So I understand, but that what you've just said is total millennial. I'm also a millennial, so I understand, but Z and Alpha Gen don't feel that way necessarily. And I think that's what we have to think about. That it's
Okay, so put us in the mindset of them. What do they think like then? If I can't relate, that's even more scary that I can't actually relate to their situation.
well, it's not. Look, you have a 4-year-old, so yes, this is going to come, and I'm sure you work with, or maybe there are people that in your life who are in their teen years or younger, but they're far more socially aware, partly because they can be, they have the technology to, than previous generations have been at their age. I mean, I have mentees in my office who are so devastatingly concerned about the climate in a way that my generation and older generations, I mean, we are, but not in the same way that they are at that age. They are so clued up on it. The first thing that my clients do, if their family is investing in a company, or even if they're buying a pair of jeans, frankly, is they will look up their board. They will look up who advises them, who heads up that company. If everybody on there looks the same, is the same background, the same age, went to the same university, they want nothing to do with it. And in a way, thank God, it's important that we have people like that, evolving and moving us forward, but it's challenging for the older generations. I
So
would,
yeah, so you're basically saying that they're very much sort of like ESG focused. They are green focused.
yeah, they are. It's not just, that should be the standard for them. They are,
You should tell them to move to Isle of Man. It's the biosphere. It's the biosphere of the world. There's
yes.
we're one of the only carbon neutral countries. Maybe I can relate to that generation. I don't know. I find it
How's,
very intriguing.
how's the party scene?
Yeah, quite light. Yeah. There's more seals and cows, I think, than people. But it's if that's well, actually, well, you look at that the generation seen. If I'm right in saying the next generation is more alcohol-free parties. It's not
They are,
yeah
absolutely.
0% alcohol,
Mm.
but there's got to be a healthy transition in. So how do you address that then? So these people come to you and they say, look, I've come from let's just be as extreme as possible. They've come from parents made a large amount of money from plantations.
Mhm.
They're in this generation now. What are their struggles and how are you fixing that?
Well, first of all, you're just naming it. Most of the time, the problems aren't being aired. They've never been discussed, not in a really, pragmatic way. So you get everyone around the table and you say, let's talk about it. So the number one is air it. What are the
Okay.
challenges? Give also, the likelihood is that give the previous generation a chance to also defend, not defend, but explain themselves, because they weren't necessarily the people that started the business either, in whatever
Mm.
industry it may be. Organizational change takes a long time, and if you're evolving from one industry to another, that doesn't happen overnight. So explaining, I think the best thing that these families can do, or family businesses, is be more transparent about their vulnerabilities. Just to say, hey guys, we know that this isn't working, or we know that this has been a problem. We are not shoving it under the rug. We are going to address it. We're also hiring the right people to address it, because that's a big thing, which is if you have look, every successful person I know has an accountant and a lawyer and a tax advisor and maybe a trust that they can call that's on their phone. Wonderful. You're taking care of your money. You're taking care of the legalities around your money. When are you taking care of the humans? And how
Mm.
are you doing that? Because actually, that is a different skill set. It doesn't mean that your lawyer and your accountant aren't wonderful people and human people. That's not the case at all. But their training, their qualifications are different. It's important that these people also invest in the right psychological, organizational psychological change, all of those diversity, inclusion, get the right people in for those jobs.
And do you find it a struggle when you try to involve the parents into this discussion?
No, I think a lot of the time, actually, once the young adult has started doing the work themselves and are bringing home insightful discussions to have again, just around the kitchen table, they are far more open. But yeah, initially there will be perhaps some resistance.
That is very, very interesting. And you know what? For someone at 33, it makes me feel so scared for the future because yeah, it's true. Maybe I can't relate to it, but I think, and maybe you're right in saying that a lot of parents aren't maybe as adventurous or I don't know actually. I think quite a lot of high net wealths are the Ironmans. They like to do Ironman races. They like to push themselves physically, but I suppose you do get some that just quite laid back, like to sit on the board, like to go on their holidays 4 or 5 times a year and don't do anything. But I think if I think there's a very clear cut. If you are in that side of things where you're running marathons or you're pushing yourself from a physical aspect, if you're involving whatever generation, the newest generation into that mindset of pushing the limits and doing it, you can avoid those situations, right?
Yeah,
I
but
think.
but what I'm always fascinated by is that these very successful families, even this discussion, we're talking about these extreme things like, which are great, go up a mountain and have a whirlwind adventure and do a marathon and do an Ironman. Why is it so difficult to sit around a table together and have a conversation about uncomfortable topics? That is the number one thing that families who want to survive their wealth need to do. That is
Yeah.
it. Because frankly, anything suppressed eventually becomes sinister as far as I'm concerned. So if we can get things that are suppressed round open, aired, worked through, your family's health, and that will impact the wealth and will impact the business, is in far better stead.
And would you say your experience is dealing with people that are, say, third generation, or have you seen, let's say, throughout your career, an increase in individuals like that are the first that are in um, their family to become ultra wealthy,
Mhm.
and then working with them? Because you know, I feel like that's probably going to happen a lot more now with
Yeah,
tech, AI, all these different things.
yeah. And
And yeah, I would say that actually, I find that an interesting aspect because I think that from my experience, I've spoken to about this quite openly that I find it sometimes quite difficult that been at the success that I've achieved at say 33, that I
mm,
find no other 33-year-old that I can relate to. And there are people that are second or third generational wealth, and I can't relate to them because
mhm.
they haven't had to work for that wealth. And I find that dynamic very difficult because there's not many people in that circle of mindset, I would say, that have gone and done it, got the t-shirt. Have you experienced more of those coming into, I suppose, your remit, I suppose?
Well, I think I have two answers to that. One is yes, certainly in my own consultancy with parents of sudden wealth. Sudden wealth syndrome is, I think, really what you're talking about.
Oh,
And that tends to be it may not be that fast, but it could be within, let's say, 10 years max. You've gone from, you know, maybe a working class background to a very affluent
yeah.
lifestyle. And it's a cultural shift. It's not just about the money. It's about suddenly your life looks very, very different and the people around you perceive you differently. So that's challenging. Um,
Can you just like elaborate on what is sudden wealth syndrome?
Sudden wealth syndrome is, in fairness, I'm going to flag myself. I don't know what the psychological definition is, but having worked with people who have sudden wealth, it is that they have very quickly amassed huge amounts of wealth and their emotional capabilities haven't necessarily caught up with their current lifestyle. So they feel like they're in a sort of a foreign zone, but I'm sure
Yeah.
it's a far better definition.
No, it's interesting. No, I've never heard of it. So
Mm.
you've and you've worked with those individuals on how to handle that emotional transition.
Well,
Like it's always like a lag, isn't there? It's like I call it like a lag. It's like it takes a while to catch up with your progression sometimes, like mentally to go, oh, I'm actually here,
so
not
yeah, well, absolutely. But for example, let's take the stories that we hear of, your 21, 23-year-old who built an app in their dorm at uni, and then within 3 years is a multimillionaire, if not billionaire. That that would definitely fall within sudden wealth syndrome.
Yeah.
How are you dealing with that? Suddenly you've gone from maybe having a student loan to having a trust fund, set up, and a trust fund. You're setting up your own trust. You're a beneficiary, or you're creating a beneficiary setup. Sudden wealth, if you're, let's say, one of those stories, the 21, 22-year-old who's at university and you've created an app and suddenly you've sold it and you're a multimillionaire, and you might have gone from having a student loan, which you set up the app with, and now you have all of this money. Your lifestyle is hugely different, and the people around you, even your family, suddenly you're far more affluent than your parents. How do you deal with that? It's the psychological component that we're really looking at here. There are plenty of people to help you take care of the money.
Yeah.
Plenty. There aren't that many people to help you take care of the mind.
No, it's a very good way of looking at it.
There was just one other point earlier you said about, you find it difficult maybe when people are your age, but they are second or third gen and they've inherited the wealth. There is one point to that, which is I think there isn't too much empathy for that group because, frankly, the media have spun such a wonderful web of making it look like they are all the rich kids of Instagram and do nothing for it. The reality is quite different. My experience of those, let's say, 33-year-olds who are second gen and are or third gen, is that they really, really want to work and they really want to make their own wealth, but they are struggling to find their identity within that. And imagine walking into every room and someone knowing your surname and deciding who you are, that's tough.
Yeah. So yeah, just also understanding that from an image perspective of how to own that and sort of address that, I suppose,
Yeah.
make your own stamp on it. I think it's very interesting. If we were to sort of like wrap up the conversation on leaving, I think the whole failing side of things, I think is an interesting
Yeah.
aspect. What are some simple steps, I suppose, that some of these listeners
Right.
can put in place to improve their understanding on their pathway to creating generational wealth? What are these sort of steps, potentially would you look at putting in place?
Well, firstly, talk about money. So many
Okay.
families who are creating wealth do not talk about money and they don't give their children budgets. It doesn't really matter what the number is. It's important that they understand how to budget so that
Yeah.
the first time their budgeting isn't with a huge amount aged 18 at uni, because we know how this is going to play out. So talk about money. Definitely, and that's a boundary. So boundaries are important. Definitely have consequences to when they break those boundaries and when things go wrong. A very important way of parenting, I think, is to approach it this way, which is calm voice, always follow through, which is if it's you, Sam, it's your son.
Yeah.
What's his name?
Christopher.
Okay, Christopher, if you break that again, if you scratch Daddy's car one more time, darling, I love you, but there is going to be a consequence to it, and this is going to be it. I'm going to remove all your Lego for the next 2 weeks. Do you understand? If he does it again, okay, that's it. I'm taking it away, and he'll kick and he'll scream and he'll be upset, but it's gone. And you do not break, no matter how much they want. Now, the worst response is, and we've all done it, we're all human, but which is the big blow up. I'm
Yeah.
furious, how could you have done this? I'm taking everything away. They're crying, they're upset, you're upset, you've overreacted to some degree. Then you break your consequence and you
Yeah.
don't follow through. So stay calm, strong spine, but always follow through. And so I think that's really important for failure, is that they feel the consequences of the mistake, because if they don't, you're robbing them of that opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
It's also very important to have those conversations, like I said, around the kitchen table and that everybody fails, and that's really normal.
Yeah. That's a really interesting one.
And then there's the education part, which is if you are mass affluent or certainly, how do I put it? If you are putting your child through private school systems, and that means from,
Yeah.
primary, secondary, the chances are they will be educated and socializing with people who sound like them, look like them, go on the same holidays, wear the same sort of clothes, do the same extracurriculars, etc. That's fine. The problem is unless you're giving them a taste of what the reality is outside of that, when they get to either university or a job, they have a really hard awakening, and they may say something or may not conduct themselves in a way that is, it could be deemed tone deaf. It's not
Yeah.
because they mean to, and it's not because they're bad intentions. It's just it's not been their reality. So I think that's really important that they understand how privilege is perceived and to be very aware of it.
I don't think that's like a small how do you address that then? How do you address that, them understanding they're privileged?
Okay, so there's a really good online wheel called Privilege Wheel. I would recommend everyone to look at it. It's a circle and it has everything on it that one could deem as being privileged. Now, the best way to think of privilege is when you leave your house, Sam, in the morning,
Yeah.
what do you not think about?
What do I not think about?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. Um, well, if you're talking about being privileged, I don't really think about the bills.
Hmm.
Um, there's always that someone caught me out on it, and I kind of peed me off to be honest with you. What's the price of a pint of milk?
Right.
Um, you know, I recently actually started, doing some shopping just to go and be like, what? How is this? What is these prices? Never realized that. And so I suppose, from my side of things is, you know, I would say that, but I'm very conscious or I'm very aware of that. So I try to mitigate it, I suppose. Um,
Well, so don't worry. Most people actually, unless they've done this exercise, don't think of it. But the chances are you don't leave your house, and this isn't necessarily about wealth, but you don't
yeah,
think about the color of your skin, you don't think about your sex, you don't think about your
yeah,
nationality, your age, your ability, the way that
yeah,
yeah, all of those things. So it's becoming a little bit more aware that for some people they do think about those things, and they have to and depending where they are in the world, they might have to think about their religion, their gender, all of those aspects, their sexuality, because it could harm them or they could be in danger. But the one that comes across repeatedly is also just wealth. If you have money, you likely don't worry about your housing, you don't worry about paying for your
yeah.
education, you don't those things. As if you go to uni, there will always be a set of students who desperately do worry about that, and and it's important that we prepare them to address that and communicate in an appropriate way.
Okay. I think they're all fantastic lessons, really. So talk about money, making sure there's budgets and boundaries, consequences to breaking those boundaries, calm voices, opportunities to learn, failing around the table. What did you fail at today and what did you learn from failing? I think it's fantastic. And then the privileged wheel, understanding, lessons, conduct, tone deaf, color of skin, age, gender, bills. I think it's fantastic. Honestly, I really appreciate your time
No, it's pretty fun.
coming on the podcast. It's been really enjoyable understanding a lot more around, well, failing, wealth, shame, privilege, addressing the new generation of wealth and the things that concern them. I think it's very, very interesting. If the listeners want to find out more about what you do or your services, what's the best place for them to go and visit to find out more?
Sure. So to find out more about Dallington, and we have our curriculum on there, and usually some tips around how to engage in some of these topics, it's www.dallington.co. And then my website is jessicamcgawley.com, and that's my personal consultancy.
Amazing. Honestly, thank you so much for your time, Jessica. I really appreciate it.
Okay, lovely speaking.